As you already know, the multiplication of the loaves, the miracle of the multiplication of the loaves is the only miracle that is found in all the four Gospels. And in the Gospel of Matthew and Mark, you have it twice. Now, on the peripheral level, it can be read as another miracle in the string of miracles that Matthew provides to his readers to basically tell them about Jesus' identity, that he's indeed the Son of God, that he's indeed the Messiah. And it is true, Matthew is trying to do that. But on a deeper level, this passage is so full of symbolism and meaning that a peripheral reading does not do justification to the miracle. In fact, there is a miracle within the miracle. So in my 3 points today, I would like to explore the deeper meaning of Matthew's multiplication narrative. And I want to do this in such a way that it could not only transform hearts, but actually transform the world. So let me begin. Here's my first point. I want to talk about where Matthew begins. It might seem strange to you that the story of the multiplication of the loaves begins with a reference to the death of John the Baptist. Why in the world would Matthew begin with this detail? The story of the multiplication follows immediately after the story of Herod's gruesome murder of John the Baptist. John was beheaded, and his torso was presented to a 12-year-old girl. This is child abuse. Who then handed it to her mother. A little child was manipulated to kill somebody who was righteous. Jesus heard about the murder of John the Baptist, and he withdraws. Matthew has strategically placed Jesus' banquet, which is the multiplication of loaves, right after Herod's banquet. These are two different paradigms. At Herod's banquet, there is false pride, arrogance, victimization of the righteous, the misuse of power, and murder. At Jesus' banquet, there is compassion, there is healing, trust, and sharing. Matthew tells us that when Jesus disembarked and saw the vast crowd, his heart was moved with pity for them. And this is Matthew's way of telling us that Jesus operates from a very different place than the religious and the political leaders of the time. He's really drawing a contrast. The place where Jesus operates from is a heart moved with compassion, with pity. This compassion, this heart moved with pity, is the key principle within which you have to interpret the multiplication of the loaves. I guess what I'm saying is, this is not just another miracle, but there's something else going on over here. And the key principle that is needed to interpret the multiplication of the loaves is Jesus' heart moved with compassion. Let's then go deeper. And this is my second point for today. The multiplication of the loaves and the fish is not the only miracle about which we read today. In fact, it doesn't even begin with that. Matthew tells us when he disembarked and saw the vast crowd, his heart was moved with pity, and he cured the sick. And he cured the sick. So that is the first miracle. Multiplication of the loaves comes later. So seeing the reality of the people in front of him, divine compassion becomes operative. His compassion impels him to action. What does he do? He begins by curing the sick. Come on, buddy. Want to come here? Come on here. Somebody please help this mother. Poor mom is running after this. Tie him up. No compassion here. I'm kidding. He'll become a priest someday, I'll tell you this. Okay. So his compassion impels him to action. As I said, he begins by curing the sick. By evening, the people are hungry, perhaps the same people. Now, the disciples wanted to dismiss the crowds so that they can go to the villages and buy food for themselves. Jesus refused to send them. Rather, he trained his disciples in the school of compassion. Look what Jesus says to them. The disciples said, send them so that they can get food for themselves. What Jesus says is, give them food yourselves. It's a contrast. The disciples' response was tepid. Not operating from the place of compassion, they said, 5 loaves and 2 fish is all we have. Jesus, operating from the place of compassion, says, bring them here to me. You see, the disciples must learn to give selflessly. You got food? Don't ask them to fend for themselves. You give it to them yourself. They have to learn to be selfless. If they must follow Jesus, their heart must be moved with pity. If they must continue his mission, they must operate from the same place that Jesus operates, compassion. Folks, 2,000 years later, is the world any different from the time of Jesus? Illnesses and hunger still threaten the lives of millions of people in our times. We survived a pandemic. But the recent Ebola outbreak, which killed 1,450 people in Congo alone, tells us that we are not beyond the age of epidemics. Meningitis in our own country. I'm not eating lettuce these days when you go out. The data on hunger is even more disconcerting. This is what is disconcerting. Hunger is getting so rampant that it is getting impossible to measure hunger. At one point, you could have data and you can rely on the data. But now they're telling us that it's becoming impossible to even measure hunger. According to Concern Worldwide USA, 9 million people die of hunger and hunger-related issues. Do you know 10,000 children die of hunger and hunger-related issues every day? Every day. In this country, which has everything, 14 million children live in food insecure homes. To make it worse, we have chosen to cut funding for food assistance to those who need it both nationally and globally. Why should we care about hungry people, right? So as we face the challenges that arise from illnesses, from starvation, war, and large-scale displacement of peoples, today's scripture invites us. No, I take that back. Today's scripture challenges us to operate from the same place that Christ operates. Listen, Jesus did not own anything. He had nothing. But on that day, Christ's compassion brought about a miracle. There were only 5 loaves and 2 fishes, but a heart moved with compassion provided the rest. And just as Jesus trained his disciples into the school of compassion, we must learn. We don't need riches to transform the world. All you need is a compassionate heart. May we be schooled in the school of compassion. Let's go one step deeper. My final point. Matthew's narrative of the actual miracle is composed in Eucharistic language. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he said the blessing, broke the bread, and gave them to the disciples, who in turn gave them to the crowd. Sounds very much like the consecration at the Eucharist. This tells us that we must read a little more deeply. When we read the story of the multiplication of loaves in light of the first reading from Isaiah, we realize that the Eucharist is a foreshadow of an even greater reality. The heavenly banquet. So there's Herod's banquet, there is this banquet, and there's one more to come. Isaiah says, "Come to the water to buy grain without money, wine and milk without cost, to come to me and listen that you may have life." These words tell us that God's grace is abundant. It's free. Come to the water. Come to God. Get the life that you wanted. You pay nothing. It's all free and it's abundant. At the multiplication of loaves, Matthew tells us 5,000 men ate, not counting the women and children, and yet there were 12 wicker baskets left over. It's telling us that God's goodness and grace is abundant and it's free. But the use of the Eucharistic language to describe the multiplication loaves also tells us that the Eucharist has implications. So you came here this morning, I want to go for Mass, man, it's Sunday. If I don't go, it's a mortal sin. I need to go and attend Mass. Please don't attend Mass and go back. There are implications to this. Every Eucharist is a miracle of the multiplication of God's abundant goodness and grace. Folks, here there is bread and wine for all. Here there is grace and mercy for all. Here there is abundant life for all. And it is God's free gift. Eat, drink. Let our deepest hunger be satisfied. But at every Eucharist, there is a miracle within the miracle. The Eucharist creates in us the heart of Jesus. Here we worship the Eucharistic Lord, but here we are also schooled in compassion. Here we enter into communion with the triune God, but it also binds us together. Communion is not just this way, communion is this way and one another. Here we learn to share bread with the hungry. Here we learn to treat one another as brothers and sisters. Here we learn to overcome hate and spread love. Here we learn to make peace rather than wage war. Here we learn to forgive freely, to love tenderly, and to walk humbly with God and with one another. That is the implication of the Eucharist. That is celebrating the Eucharist with the heart of Jesus. May our Eucharistic celebration today be an experience of the multiplication of the loaves. If you ever wanted to be 2,000 years back when Jesus multiplied the loaves, well, this is it. Here we are. May we all experience the abundant grace, the mercy, the goodness, the compassion of God. But then, may this very Eucharist also help us to put on the heart that moves with pity, a heart with compassion. People of God said,